Gracia, good morning.
Good morning, Professor Becvar. How are you?
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. And you?
I'm fine, so far.
Perfect. I was investigating how to record this, and it says that it has a button.
I'm recording, so you can record also.
Okay, I'm going to be recording as well. You can hear me well? You can see
I can,
me?
yes.
Okay, Perfect. So let's start with your introduction. Please say your
Now,
position.
let me ask you some questions first.
Okay, sure.
So, you're a graduate student.
I am an undergrad.
Oh, you're an
Um,
undergrad.
yes, I am studying a double major in philosophy and multimedia journalism. And yes, I'm still an undergraduate. This is my last semester at UTEP, actually.
Wonderful. So, congratulations. I hope everything is fine for you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Jim Becvar, and I'm a professor of chemistry. I've been a faculty member here at UTEP for 41 years. I've been a faculty member for 41 years.
Okay.
That's a long time. It's very difficult for me to remember the early days. I came in 1978, and I can't remember those early days very well at all. So anyway, so in 2000, Dr. Ben Flores, who is an electrical engineer, was then the director of the National Science Foundation grant to UTEP called the Model Institutions of Excellence Grant. It was a huge grant and did major changes in the way UTEP conducts business in the STEM disciplines. They introduced the it wasn't called University 1301 at that time. I can't remember what the name was, but they introduced students being formed into cohorts when they arrive on campus. And these cohorts would take the same English class, the same math class, and some other classwork together so that they would see the same people all day long. Rather than coming into three different very large classes where they didn't get to know anyone. So these cohorts of 30 students or thereabouts would stay together the whole day and form a study group so that they could help each other with the difficulties they were having in the classes, and it worked very well. So that's one of the things that the Model Institutions of Excellence started. They also started the Center for Effective Teaching and Learning, CETAL. I don't know that that is still in existence. Something like it is still on campus. It's to help incoming faculty when they first arrive on campus learn how to conduct a teaching situation, because most faculty members come on campus raring to go in research, doing their wet chemistry, wet biology, whatever kind of research work they're going to go. They've spent an intense time learning how to do that in the last 5 years or 8 years before they got on campus, but they've never learned how to teach. They may have been a teaching assistant in a laboratory course, but they've never been really instructed in how does one conduct office hours, interact with students during the lecture, give a lecture, organize a lecture, and so on. So it's difficult to just arrive on campus and start lecturing in, for example, in my case, in general chemistry, but that's what we were asked to do when I arrived. Is I just had 3 sections of first semester general chemistry or something on that order, maybe 4 sections.
Right.
And just go ahead and teach the students how to learn chemistry. Well, that wasn't difficult for me, but it was a challenge because there were some topics that I wasn't familiar with at all when I arrived on campus. Anyway, so come along to the year 2000, and students are not doing very well in general chemistry in this 3 lectures a week, 3 lectures a week, 3 lectures a week format. And so Ben Flores was the director of this Model Institutions of Excellence grant. And he said to me, Jim, we have to do something about the very large and very significant failure rate in general chemistry. It's killing our majors. I mean, we just end up with only a very few students that pass this course, abstract idea course of general chemistry. And we would like to have a greater flow through of those students into our majors. And so is there something you can do to try to improve the passing rate? And so he said because he was director of this program for several years already, had gone to conferences that the National Science Foundation had organized. And one of them was on peer-led team learning.
Okay.
That was an initiative that they started funding in about 1995. So this is year 2000. And Ben says to me, why don't you try this? See, I'll support the program for you using these MIE, that's the Model Institutions of Excellence funds, and we can hire peer leaders and reorganize the course. And so I did not want to do this on a voluntary basis. So many programs introduced this peer-led team learning, that's PLTL. I'll probably refer to it as PLTL
Okay.
in this discussion with you.
Mm-hmm.
Many people introduced that on a voluntary basis. So they had existing courses. They would say, okay, we're going to have some sessions, some special help sessions. If you want to, you can sign up. These will help you pass the class, and you can organize into this scenario, and it will help you achieve a better grade and make sure that you do pass the class. Well, I had had experience with voluntary situations in the years prior to this, and I did not want to make it a voluntary situation because the students that need the help the most and would benefit from this the most are having struggle with the coursework, generally because they can't focus on the coursework. They've got jobs, they've got families, they've got outside situations, and they want to minimize the time that they're at the university and the time that they are studying. So they want to get the benefit of what this would be, but not spend any time doing it. And so the students that would benefit the most from this intervention would be just the students who most likely would not take the opportunity, take advantage of the opportunity.
Right.
So I insisted that it be a mandatory intervention. And the only way to do this would be if one of the lectures a week were given up, and the time for that lecture plus a little more would be put into a workshop. And so imagine a class of 100 students. The sections were a little bigger than that, 150 students, I suppose, in the year 2000. Were organized so that all of those students and all the other students taking that same class, this is first semester general chemistry, were organized into smaller study units, smaller communities of learning. And each one of those was overseen by an undergraduate who had done well in the course previously. And that student would facilitate the learning for those small study sections of the program that had developed in New York suggested study sections of 6 to 8 students. But in order to accommodate all the students that we had at UTEP, with the money that Dr. Flores was going to make available, I needed to have larger sections than that. So the first sections were from 12 to 15 students. And in this course, traditionally now, over the past 20 years, this program has been in existence for 20 years now. The size of the groups in the first semester are about 15 or 16 students to begin with, and with one undergraduate facilitator called a peer leader, a peer of the students. And sometimes the peer leader and one of his or her students would take other coursework like political science or history in the same section, would be in the same class in some other courses, but the undergraduate would facilitate the learning in this workshop that we call these small sections workshops, to help the students learn this abstract discipline called general chemistry. Have you taken general chemistry?
No, I have not.
Okay. Well, it's abstract, and it just means that the concepts are, some of them are not in society to any extent whatsoever. So the terminology and the ideas are pretty foreign to most people. So it's a difficult course, and students struggle with it. So,
Right.
so that funding was available for about 4 years, and then one of the things that happened at UTEP in about the early 2000s was that UTEP wanted to increase the tuition for students. And so they applied for having this increase in tuition, and the system, University of Texas system, said, okay, we will allow you to increase tuition, but only if 25% of the increment, only if 25% of the new revenue that results from this tuition increase is put back into your campus in the form of on-campus student employment opportunities relevant to their majors. So that, for example, in your situation in philosophy, I don't know how large your introductory philosophy courses are, and I don't know whether students have trouble passing philosophy, but if they did, something like this could be put into philosophy so that someone like yourself, an upper level undergraduate who has done well in the course and understands all the concepts that are being taught in the course, would facilitate the learning for a dozen students or so, struggling with understanding ideas of logic and so on, whatever you learn in philosophy. So that's the idea for this peer-led team learning.
Right. I wanted to ask, it sounds very familiar to the student entering program, because they have years as well. Is that part of?
But it's distinctly different in the following way. The entering student program was what was started by that initial MIE, Model Institutions of Excellence funding, but the entering students program is different in the following way. Every one of those sections has a faculty or staff person who's in charge of the section.
Okay.
That person often has a peer leader associated with that particular section, but the peer leader is not the one in charge of the learning that goes on during that entering students course. The faculty member is the one that's actually leading the discussion, leading the ideas that are presented on a lecture by lecture or day by day situation. In the chemistry PLTL program, the peer leader is the one that decides what is done on a day by day by day situation. And if the students are struggling, it's not the faculty member that shows or provides some guidance of how you learn this material. It's got to be the peer leader. And so the peer leader struggles with figuring out what are they going to do, how are they going to do it, how much time are they going to spend on this idea or that idea, practicing this kind of problem or that kind of problem. It's the undergraduate who provides that direction for the facilitation, and they struggle. The peer leaders have to try a lot of little experiments to see if they can get the point across to the students. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But it's not the faculty member that's in charge. We do meet with all of the peer leaders twice a week, each of those meetings being 1 hour long, where we talk about what did you do, what did you try, how did it work, here's the content that we're going to cover next week. Are there any questions? Do we have, these peer leaders are paid in our program. So that's another issue that we have to discuss, you and I. Where does the money come from? Initially from the MIE grant, Model Institutions of Excellence, the funds came from the National Science Foundation. Peer leaders are paid a little bit more than minimum wage. The peer leaders now are paid $8.50. I think way back when we may have started at $7.50 or $8 an hour, something like that. It was above minimum wage, but it's not that much above minimum wage. And they're hired for 10 hours a week. Now those 10 hours are spent 2 hours per workshop. Most of those students that are paid 10 hours a week have 2 workshops. So that's 4 hours. They also spend, every peer leader spends 2 hours in these weekly meetings, which we just happen to call preview. That's just the word we use. In other programs around the country that have this PLTL intervention, they're called prep sessions for preparatory or preparation sessions. In our previews, we meet with the students for 1 hour on Monday and 1 hour on Friday to review what they've done, what worked, what didn't work, to go over some strategies that could be used, some activities that might be used by the peer leaders to facilitate the learning that needs to be done. Go over the content, the ideas that are going to be presented during lecture, and to discuss matters of other organization using Blackboard and keeping track of the time that they have spent doing the various things that they do, and filling out timesheets. I don't know whether you're paid through a timesheet or not, but that's how these peer leaders are paid. So they submit a timesheet to the department secretary every other week. So the 10 hours, they also have office hours, 2 hours a week for office hours. They do attend lectures, not necessarily every single lecture for every single minute, but they attend the lecture so that they can see what the faculty members are actually saying during the lecture, what kinds of problems the faculty members are giving, and what concepts that the faculty member is discussing in lecture. And then they have preparation time that they need to prepare for the activities that designing the activities that they want to come up with. So this potential tuition increase that happened in about 2003 or 4, that took over the payment of the peer leaders in this first course in chemistry for a couple years, until the enrollment got so large that that wasn't sufficient, and we also wanted to extend this idea to other courses at the university, and the National Science Foundation had what is called a STEP grant. So these STEP grants were made available to institutions to introduce some kind of intervention in STEM coursework. And so we applied to the National Science Foundation for a STEP grant in 2007. Ben Flores was instrumental in that application also. He was the initial PI, principal investigator for that STEP grant. And that STEP grant extended PLTL, or proposed to extend PLTL, to the second course in general chemistry. There's a first semester and a second semester general chemistry course. It, in order to engage students who would be biology majors, that funding was going to be extended to having PLTL workshops in organic chemistry first semester, in general physics 1 and general physics 2, and in pre-calculus, so that there was an intervention in math, physics, chemistry, and it would pertain to students majoring in biological subjects because most of them have to take organic chemistry. Right. So that was funded, and so the program in second semester general chemistry started in 2008, along with organic and physics and pre-calculus. And the enrollment really increased in all of these courses during the period of that grant. Toward the end, we asked if the funding could be taken over by the university. We asked the dean of the College of Science if she would continue to fund these peer leaders, and she said no, she didn't have any source of funds for that, but we could ask for maintenance and operation funding from the department if we wanted to continue to pay the peer leaders. The problem with that proposal was that these maintenance and operation, or M&O funds, were already very thinly stretched. The department had not had an increase in that kind of funding for 20-some years at that point, and there was no money available. So we had to come up with a solution. And one of the faculty members, Juan Novarone, suggested that we sell workbooks, that we create workbooks and sell workbooks. And so one summer I spent the entire summer organizing my old exams that I had, that were my own creation, into workbooks, and we proposed to sell those to the students and at a small amount, which would then become the funding, like a royalty, would become the funding that would support the peer leaders. Well, the university said, you can write your workbooks, but you can't sell them to the students for very much more than it costs to produce them. So that mechanism was a solution, but it wasn't going to work for funding the program. One of the peer leaders suggested, well, we could write those workbooks. You create a nonprofit organization so that the funding is taken out of the hands of the faculty members and put into the hands of the board of directors of this nonprofit, and we'll keep everything above board, and by having this nonprofit intervention in there. And that is what we have done for the last 6 years. And it has been very successful to take over the funding. We're now at a point where the sale of workbooks through the bookstore pays the nonprofit puts money back into the university through a gift fund, and the gift fund pays the hourly wages of the peer leaders. The peer leaders now generate the workbooks. The faculty are not in the operation of writing the workbooks anymore. The peer leaders write the workbooks. So they're experienced, they know the material, they know the sections that the students struggle with, the kinds of problems that students have difficulty with. They took the course, they struggled with those problems. They see what problems the students are having that they're facilitating. So they can understand the material well enough to write the problems as well as I could. I can't write any better problems than they can. So the students write the workbooks. They've started to write small sections of content explanation for the concepts that are involved in these abstract concepts in chemistry. And they now, because of Chegg and other online services that provide any student anywhere the answers to problems at the end of chapters for published textbooks and for these workbooks, Chegg and other companies like that will give you, if you subscribe to their service, all the answers that they have available for all the textbooks in physics, math, chemistry, biology, civil engineering, maybe philosophy. I don't know whether they'll have written answers for philosophy questions or not. Those sometimes are, but they'll give the proofs and so on for logic problems, I'm sure. So there's need to revise the problems, and that is now done by the peer leaders, so that every semester we print a workbook on a different color of paper, so the peer leaders know which workbook the students are using. So students buy a workbook from the bookstore for about $90 or something like that. And the cost to the bookstore is sufficient that some money is generated from each sale, and that money is paid by the publishing, sorry, not by the publishing, by the owner of the bookstore to this nonprofit. And the nonprofit organization that is organized for this purpose is called Lead for America Corporation, LFAC, Lead for America Corporation. Money goes into the bank account for Lead for America, and checks are written to the university to fund this gift fund. And the funds from the gift fund are used using these hourly timesheet forms that the peer leaders fill out to pay the peer leaders. And that's how the funding for this program works now. And that's it funds about 90% of the peer leaders' cost. So it's sort of a closed loop. And the peer leaders revise the workbooks semester by semester to defeat this Chegg, and also to give them an opportunity to create. And some of them have wanted to create other things. And so they've created guides for facilitation of learning using this peer-led method. So there's a peer leaders guide, facilitation of team-based learning that a few peer leaders and some other people have written.
I wanted to ask exactly about that. There seems to be some benefits or assets that undergraduates contribute to the class, as well as some faculty influence going on in there.
Oh, yes. The faculty really have left much of the organization of what is done in the preview to the peer leaders. There are now head peer leaders that are chosen, and they oversee they create an agenda for each preview and a list of topics, and they organize what is discussed to some extent during the preview. So there's the students I challenge them all the time. What are you going to create for the betterment of this program? And so they create games and activities. They have created probably 100 games, and some of these are very original activities to help students learn the content of the general chemistry course. So the benefit to the peer leaders is quite enormous. There's a lot of professional development that is done. How are you going to get the points across in a better way to your students? What can you do to better facilitate the understanding of moles and enthalpy and Lewis structures. These are very foreign ideas to most students, and so that they present difficulties in learning what's the gist of what's going on here. How do you do this?
Right. Thank you so much for saying that. It's really interesting how the creativity has to do so much with what the pre-leaders do in the classroom, as they have to.
Most students receive. They're constantly in a reception mode of what the faculty member is trying to get across in class. In the case of the peer leaders are transmitting. They are generating. They are forcing the students to, they're taking the faculty role during these workshops, and the peer leaders also facilitate team learning. So the 15 or 16 students are organized into groups of 3 or 4 students, and those groups of 3 or 4 students are challenged with one problem, for example. And they all work on the same problem together. And sometimes there's competition. The peer leader will say, okay, the first team to finish the solution and give the answer will receive a bonus point of some kind or other. So the peer leaders provide a small portion of the grade to the students in this course.
Okay.
So there's homework, and then there's workshop, and so those are on the order of 10%. Each of them is about 10% of the student's grade in the course. The other 80% is determined by scores on exams and the final exam. Now that we're all going to be online, there may be other opportunities for creativity, because normally we will give an hour exam on a specific day, like March 6th was the most recent hour exam. Right. And so here were the 200 students in my lecture, all in the same room at the same time for an hour and 20 minutes. I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So they were taking the exam for an hour and 20 minutes, and that was it. They either do well or they didn't do well, and many students did not do well. I guarantee you that that this is not a perfect solution. Not everyone passes this class, even now. But now that we have online exams, and I don't know exactly how to do this yet, I just know that it's going to be capable. We might be able to offer students exams a second chance at passing the exam. So you go away and study, and you know what you didn't get right this time, go and study those concepts, and we'll give you another chance using other problems that cover the same content. So we might be able to do something like that now using this online exam, because I was not at all familiar with Blackboard's capability of giving tests.
Right.
I used to do paper tests. So far in class, I manufacture different colors with the questions in a different order and the answers in a different order. Some multiple choice, some work out the problems, and then have to grade those situations. But now we can somehow take advantage of Blackboard and maybe offer a second chance or even a third chance for students to pass the course.
Right.
So I'm going to have to stop for just a second.
Hold on a sec. I need keys to the Tahoe. They need it backed up. I'll back it up. I just don't have keys.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right, there we go.
Okay, so
momentary interruption. I can take a drink. So now we're going to have online situation. That'll present its own difficulty, because we are going to have to conduct these previews from a distance. And how do you do that? And how do we have to take care of everything that we have to take care of? I don't know. We'll see. Just more challenges, more opportunity for creating something new that didn't exist before.
Right. Right. Thank you so much for your answers. This is really interesting. I can already see so many merging with philosophical ideas. So thank you so much for doing that project as well. My next question is about the appliance of this program into the graduate levels, or maybe to adult education. Do you think that's part of the PLTL agenda?
So let me go back to that second grant, that STEP grant. At some point, I became the PI, the principal investigator for that grant. So I was somehow trying to manage coursework in physics and mathematics and do something to interact and oversee this program that had many peer leaders and other disciplines engaged in content delivery and content facilitation that I don't know anything about. And it was very difficult to oversee that. I really depended on key people in physics and organic chemistry because I'm not an organic chemist. Those courses had to be overseen by the faculty members in those disciplines or teaching those courses. It's very difficult for overseeing really more than one course, because I still interact with the first semester general chemistry peer leaders, even though I am not teaching this semester first semester general chemistry, but just overseeing the second semester general chemistry peer leaders is enough management for me. There's 30 peer leaders in first semester currently, and there's 30 peer leaders, almost 30, maybe 25 peer leaders in second semester. Those peer leaders facilitate the learning for 2 classes in second semester general chemistry. Dr. Narayan is teaching the other lecture section of second semester general chemistry. And so he and I oversee those peer leaders, and it's a difficult task. It's enough for one person to manage 30 people facilitating learning in one course. Trying to do this in many, many courses is essentially impossible. Now, can this be extended to graduate? Of course it can. Upper level courses, the Florida International University has a huge PLTL program in biology. They don't have any oversight or any involvement in chemistry at Florida International University. They're in Miami, but essentially every course in biology, and that's something like 4,000 students a semester take coursework at Florida International University in biology, 4,000 students a semester. And so there are peer leaders for ecology and for physiology and all of the subdisciplines of biology have specific courses, immunology, parasitology,
Right.
besides general biology. So they have a huge general biology program, and they don't pay any of their peer leaders. Their peer leaders are doing this on a voluntary basis for the benefit they receive from being engaged in the program. They have a very substantial PR, public relations effort, and so the peer leaders do this just for the benefit that they receive. They also sometimes get a certificate, or they have a community, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. They get credit on outside of coursework for doing this social benefit activity.
But those are not paid positions.
Those are not paid positions.
Okay.
The only people paid in that program are the very early on peer leaders who have advanced to be the overseers of the entire program. They have 3 paid positions.
Right.
for people who were our former peer leaders who oversee many levels. They have not only head peer leaders, but they have discussion group leaders, and they have research associate peer leaders, and they have a very fancy, well-designed program to oversee how this operation without any pay can be maintained.
Right. Right. Okay.
So they have something like 200 peer leaders in that program, maybe more. I don't know how many. There's a lot.
So then it seems that for the UTEP chapter of PLTL, it may be that you need more people and more funding for it to escalate to graduate levels or adult
If
education.
it were to advance back, we no longer have PLTL for organic chemistry, for example,
Mhm.
or for biochemistry, or for any of the disciplines, analytical, physical chemistry. All of those courses could benefit from having a peer leader. The senior level courses, or junior and senior level courses, could easily have graduate student peer leaders. So there is potentially a role there, but it's going to have to be overseen by someone other than me. I have my hands full just taking care of general chemistry first and second semester.
Right.
But it would definitely be possible to use graduate students in those upper division courses, because the benefit that I have with regard to general chemistry is that that's generally taken as a freshman or as a sophomore. So those freshmen become sophomores, and then they become juniors. And as soon as they've finished the course, they can apply to be a peer leader in that course. And so I can sometimes have peer leaders who stay in the program for 6 semesters sometimes. Then you have to also realize that I haven't mentioned yet that most of the peer leaders are not chemistry majors.
Okay.
Most of the peer leaders major in other things. I don't know that I've ever had a philosophy student as a peer leader, but we've had psychology students. We currently have psychology majors who are peer leaders. I think the largest group outside of chemistry is from biology. So many of these peer leaders believe that they're going to be medical doctors, MDs. So they're in majors that will prepare them for the medical profession.
Right.
We do have quite a number of engineering students that are peer leaders. Really, very few of the peer leaders are chemistry majors. Maybe only 20% or 10% of the peer leaders are chemistry majors.
Okay. So then the only requirement seems to be that you are an undergraduate student and that you have taken the chemistry introductory courses.
And have been successful.
Right. Okay.
That's an A or a B. That you earned an A or a B in the course, that you're interested in the facilitation of learning, that this is not just a job. This is something that you're interested in to help other people. So there's some altruism involved in this. You want to do good for other people. So there are the head peer leaders now take they are the ones that conduct interviews of potential candidates. So students who have done well in the course can apply to become a peer leader, and then the head peer leaders and a council of peer leaders. So there's some other peer leaders who are very experienced that can be peer leader council members. That council and the head peer leaders interview potential candidates. So the head peer leaders for first semester will interview students for the becoming a first semester peer leader, and the head peer leaders for second semester interview students who would become peer leaders for second semester.
Right. Okay. Okay, that that seems like a very good program. Um, I want to talk now about scientific instruments. Dr. Dasgupta wants me to. You had a chance to see the questions, right?
I did. She wondered whether we spend much time during these workshops helping the students understand the concepts behind the instruments.
Right.
And in reality, I have to say we do not.
Okay.
There are very fancy, expensive instruments that chemists use. Uh, Nuclear magnetic resonance for organic chemistry. Uh, High performance liquid chromatography or HPLC separations, and then detection methods.
Right.
We don't spend very much time doing that because the students are struggling to understand the relatively simple concepts, but they're abstract. And so the, the peer leaders facilitate the understanding of the concepts more than they do the understanding of how to run and how to use the information that comes from these fancy devices. Now, when there were peer leaders in organic chemistry does, the instruction involves understanding what nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, spectra provide in the way of information. And so in that course, when there were peer leaders, those peer leaders were definitely helping students understand how to run, how to manipulate what the data that comes from NMR spectra. But in general chemistry, I guess light absorption spectroscopy, a very tiny amount of time is spent facilitating that understanding, a little bit,
Okay. So
not
then,
much.
it depends on the discipline whether the students should learn how to manipulate these instruments that are useful to that
Many
side.
times the upper division courses in chemistry spend
Mm-hmm.
a lot of time. Analytical chemistry does spend a lot of time helping students understand separations and the kinds of separations that chemists conduct to purify a sample so that you have just one kind of molecule that you're looking at in the sample.
Mm-hmm.
So the upper division courses spend a lot of time with students. If there were peer leaders in those courses, they would be spending time with instrumentation, but not in the general chemistry course. There are some basic concepts that are needed in those upper division courses that students struggle with to understand.
Right. Okay. Okay. So
She
then
also
let's.
wanted something about the history of science, the history of the development of these instruments and so on. So just because I was not brought up with a strong grounding in the history of science, I am not familiar with a lot. In fact, I have to tell you, I don't have any degrees in chemistry. All of my degrees are in physics and
Okay.
biophysics, but uh, I am not all that familiar with the history of chemical instrumentation and the development of how people learned about the electron, how people learned
Right.
about the neutron. Um, I have dreamed of having a very simple mass spectrometer for students to see how that works, because that would be a very good instrument for general chemistry to have available for students to figure out what is separation based on mass. Uh, how is that conducted? How is that done? So students would see isotopes of atoms being separated from one another.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that would be very useful. But the history of science is something that I am not that familiar with. Unfortunately, that's an unfortunate deficiency on my part. Otherwise, we I would have the peer leaders spend a little more time dealing with how do people know that this is true and that that is true.
Yes. Yeah, that is something that has a lot of
Maybe the next person in charge will know more about that, and we'll spend more time delving into that, or having the peer leaders delve into that.
Right. Okay, so then it seems that the priorities for each, not only workshop, but for each cohort, or for each course, maybe, seems to be shifting from, or not shifting, accumulating from the faculty research, and then having some influence because of that, because of those
Well,
reasons.
I have to say that the research that I have conducted while here at UTEP, I study something called bioluminescence. These are things like fireflies, except that I study bacteria, bacterial bioluminescence. That has influenced what I do in workshop, in that I try to have the peer leaders not just conduct dry classroom activities, but
Right.
actually some wet chemistry, some of what I call explorations. So the peer leaders do try to get students to see and to get engaged in some wet chemistry that, for example, the concept of polarity. Molecules, some molecules are nonpolar and other molecules are polar. And so polar molecules will interact with an electrical field. And a stream of liquid that consists of polar molecules will bend in an electric field. And you can demonstrate that polar molecules will do this and nonpolar molecules will not. And so seeing that allows students to realize, well, gosh, there's an attractive force that an electrical field generates for these polar molecules. So they spend some time doing some hands-on kinds of activities that I call explorations. They take students through explorations. And so I've tried to develop many of these, and the peer leaders develop some of these explorations as well as part of the activities that they have contributed to the sequence of the course.
Right. Right. Okay. So then, there's a lot of similarity with philosophy, and how to teach abstract ideas, because in philosophy there are a lot of those as well. So,
Yes, I'm sure.
and I understand it's difficult to teach someone else what's true or what's not, and or how to maybe visualize those abstract ideas so that comprehension is better. And that is a huge priority of what I'm understanding is a peer-led team learning. So it's
It definitely is. So let me ask you, what are you going to do in the future? When this is your last semester, what are you going to do in the fall and after that? What are your intentions?
I have applied to graduate school. I'm looking into concentration in ethics and social epistemology.
Ethics and social what?
Epistemology. How we know.
Epistemology. What does
Mhm.
that mean?
How we know.
How we know?
Yes, knowledge
Yeah.
and
How do we know? That's amazing. It's amazing that we know, I think.
me
And that
too. I agree.
you look for consistency and you make observations and reach conclusions and tentative new hypotheses, and
Mhm.
you test those as best you can think of ways to do the test.
Right. It works sometimes.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yes. Okay. Let's move on now to the next question. It's about philosophers of science, and how they talk about little science and
Yes, Dr. Dasgupta did explain to me about the little science.
okay.
So almost all of my career I have spent trying to create little science experiments using these luminescent bacteria, because I've never had a large research grant to buy very fancy, powerful equipment. And so I try to do very little science, things that I can build myself and investigate questions that I can conduct in the laboratory using relatively inexpensive materials. So I have done this for my entire career as a student of bioluminescence. So I understand what she means by simple science. You have to be very clever to do simple and little science. You have to create questions that can be studied using small research devices or experiments. So sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not. So I do understand that her idea about little science and whether major breakthroughs can be conducted using little science. It's hard for any one person to envisage conducting simple science that will yield great results, astounding observations. So the questions that I ask are relatively simple questions, not grandiose questions that would require atom splitters and things of that sort.
Right. But do you think that little science can be used to answer not only the small, narrowed questions, but also those grandiose?
Well, so I view my role is to help students gain the perspective of how to conduct science, how to do science. And so small experiments can yield the opportunity for students to learn to ask meaningful questions that can be answered using small science experiments. So, what are the subparticles of atoms I can't deal with, but can I determine whether the enzyme that facilitates the light generation in these luminescent organisms is part of a bigger particle, a bigger enzyme complex? I can ask questions like that, and there are ways that I can address the answers to those questions and help students understand the questions that I'm asking and understand the strategies that I'm trying to use to address the answers to those questions. So simple science can be used in meaningful ways to find answers that are not known at the time. You just have to be clever. You have to know enough about a particular situation and a system that you can ask meaningful questions.
Thank you very much for saying that. Okay, so the next question is about good science. I don't know what she means by that, but she asked, can there be good science done outside expensive labs? So I guess going back to
let me give you a very pertinent question right now.
Okay.
Right now, the United States and the rest of the world is struggling to deal with the coronavirus outbreak. So there are experiments that can be conducted that don't involve much money. So these would be simple science ideas. For example, the plants and animals that exist right now may manufacture natural products. There may be some natural products that would offer partial immunity or partial defense against the coronavirus. So this is this is a very complex organism. I mean, it's a virus, so it's not very complex. I mean, it only has a few proteins and some RNA, but nutraceuticals or phyto compounds that come from plants might offer some defense against this virus. Experiments can be done. Well, they're dangerous. I mean, but you would have to convince, for example, the people of El Paso, let's say, to all consume a natural product of a plant that grows in this area, let's say.
Okay.
I don't know what that would be, but it would be possible for someone to conduct experiments using existing known non-lethal, non-dangerous nutraceuticals to see if one of those would offer some defense against this horrendous virus that is taking over the thought and activity of everybody nowadays. You're in your home, I suppose, and I'm in my home, and we're not going to come together so that we are actually face to face because of this virus. It would be possible to conduct some experiments using small science in a meaningful way. Now, you have to be clever and you have to be convincing, but that would be an example. Yes,
Okay.
it's possible to do good science on an inexpensive basis.
You just have to be clever, as I said.
You have to be clever. You have to have some knowledge as to why you would try this. Now, there are papers already appearing that describe the process that these coronavirus use for their infection. Apparently, there's a protease, which is an enzyme that cuts other proteins in a very specific way. And apparently that is somehow involved in the activation of the process for infection. These viruses produce the protease, they produce the material that will facilitate the infection. These small phytochemicals, these nutraceutical compounds might prevent the protease from doing the cutting that needs to be done in the very specific way that the protease conducts the cutting of the, and I don't know enough about this. I've only just started to read about this, but there might be some experiments that people could do in vivo, in glass, in little tubes and vials. It might be possible to study this in some fashion that I'm not clever enough to figure out.
Right.
But that would be small science. That would not be, of course, people want to use very big machines, these nuclear magnetic resonance machines and the liquid chromatography machines and so on to analyze what they're doing in a much more sophisticated fashion. But a simple experiment might yield a tremendous benefit and good science to deal with the situation of this infection. It would be possible to conduct good science doing simple science that would have meaningful results. If you're clever, you have to be clever.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, we all suffer from being limited to what's up here. That's what we can contribute. And if we don't quite get the question right, we might not get the good science result, right? That's what experiments are all about.
Thank you. We are about to end the interview. I just have one more question for you.
Okay.
Is there any other big philosophical idea that has always guided you in your career and that you want to tell?
Well, I've always been interested in questions of why and how. I think those are the most important questions to ask and the most important questions to address. Not what, who, and when, and where, but why does it do that? Why does that happen? How does that happen? What do you have to do? What way do you have to understand the why so that you can answer the question? So those questions are very dear to me. I continually stress to the peer leaders to make sure that they are asking their students, why does it work that way? How do you do that? How do you know that you've done something that addresses the why kind of question?
Right.
I guess that's a philosophy. I'm not sure.
It
I
is.
do try to contribute good to my discipline, try to help others. I am constantly interested in what can I do to make it better?
Mhm.
How can I make it better?
Do you have anything more to add to this interview? Something you would like to say that we haven't discussed?
Well, I don't exactly know what Dr. Dasgupta is going to do with the interview that you just conducted, but I wish her well. I know she's interested in ethics. It's very important to be truthful, very important to be truthful and honest. And we need leaders. We need leaders who are concerned about truth and honesty and value. It's important that they are guided by goodwill and not by what's good for me, but good for everyone.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Becvar, for your time, for your wonderful answers. You have given such interesting insight to what you do, the work you do, and the philosophy behind it. So thank you so much.
You're quite welcome, Gresha. Thank you very much for having me as an interviewee.
Right. One last thing that I will want to ask you is if you could share 10 to 15 photos of the pre-leaders, the work that you do, maybe from the time that you went to the National Science Foundation conference, because that's a key part. Anything that would be
I can
visually.
share some photographs of the peer leaders in action. There are a good place, and right now I believe you can see a UTEP peer leader named Sarah Lynn
Mm-hmm.
giving a short story about an experience she had, a very interesting experience that she had as a peer leader, because an organization that oversees this that you should know about is called the Peer-Led Team Learning International Society, PLTLIS. So if you go to the website pltlis.org, O-R-G, on the landing page that you come to, there will be an opportunity for you to watch a video. Given it's 5 minutes long, it's not very long at all. It's a very interesting story that she tells. So you can see her in action. There are some resources there on that website that, because it's a compendium of articles and conference results, and so I would highly recommend that you go and watch this video of Sarah. She's Sarah Lynn. There are some previous videos of some of the other peer leaders that have been at other institutions and at UTEP. So that will give you, I think, a chuckle to see what the situation she describes.
Okay.
pltlis.org. I'll send you some photographs that I have of peer leaders in action.
Perfect. That is perfect for what for what I want to do. Thank you so much. I will see the video right now.
Okay, so you can save your video. I'm recording this. It will be available. I'll have a link for you after we conclude the interview.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.